Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we're talking about Tenet again.
Yes.
We've been to see it now in full Imax.
Yes.
Whereas the first time we saw it in the Imax digital, which is basically widescreen. A big widescreen, but widescreen. Now we've been to see it at the Manchester, whatever it's called.
It was at the Printworks. It's
That's
the
right.
proper IMAX cinema at...
The second biggest screen in the country.
Yeah.
Outside of the BFI IMAX, and not that much smaller than it. And a lot cheaper. It was £10 a ticket.
Yeah, right.
And in the VIP section as well, I'm assuming, because that's the same price as regular, so I'm assuming that's a reopening promotional thing. Whereas £25 a ticket in the BFI.
Yes.
Which is mad.
I must say, I didn't like the film any better. In fact, I liked it even less watching it. But seeing it on the IMAX screen really raised a lot of questions for me. Because, you know, for someone who's so careful and precise about so many aspects of cinema, how can he allow his films to be shown in different ratios? Because the thing is that the IMAX screen and the widescreen are really different ratios, yeah? So the whole thing looks different. One looks like not quite a square, but squarish. You know, I just thought
like
it was very revealing, you know, because part of my criticism about Nolan is that his compositions are, you know, they're not what you expect of a great filmmaker, right? That the compositions alone are very expressive or evocative or beautiful, or, right? His compositions don't grab you in that way. And actually, to me, this is kind of a key to understanding that, because, you know, you can't compose for different formats. They're one type of composition in an IMAX cinema, and then, you know, they become another type of composition in the widescreen. So the compositions, I mean, are distorted either in one or the other, yeah? And actually, kind of, most people are not seeing it in IMAX. So, you know, if he's composing for IMAX, then actually that's not what people are seeing. Right?
Sure. Yeah, I'm with you, really.
It's the objections that people had about panning and scanning on television, or, you know, using a wide lens, but also having the little television quadrangle in the middle of your viewfinder, so you know you're really composing for television. Yeah, so the essential information is in the middle of the frame, but then you could, you know, use little bits on the sides if it's shown in a cinema, right? But since they were going to cut it anyway, yeah, so that was a way in which actually people tried to compose, yeah, for both, for two different types of frame, but with the consciousness that actually they were losing out on both, that they weren't making the most of either. Yeah.
Here's what I would say about looking at it in IMAX now that we've seen it in a regular cropping, is I felt like the full IMAX frame added almost nothing to the experience. And, you know, that may have something to do with just unimaginative or kind of boring compositions. I think it does have something to do with that. I don't think there's a really imaginative composition in the whole film. I like the way it looks enough in regular widescreen, and I like some of the centre scale they got here, but actually there's not a huge lot. You know, when I saw Dunkirk, again at the Printworks in Manchester, there was a real feeling of scale and beauty and a kind of horror almost to the images there. When I saw The Dark Knight at what used to be the Birmingham IMAX, which we don't have anymore, you know, that opening shot, which I mentioned on one of the podcasts, where it's just this boom on the soundtrack and the kind of mid-air shot of a skyscraper, you know, felt like flying, and it was this huge experience. There's not a single shot in this that makes me feel like that. The quality of the image is extraordinary.
It's superb, yeah.
IMAX film is, you can't talk about it exactly in terms of resolution like you can with digital filmmaking, because it's, you know, random grain structure, but it's said to be around 18K. That would be when you start to kind of see the grain structure and, you know, lose the beauty of the image, I guess. Which is vast, you know, like when you consider people are filming on 4K, maybe 8K, digitally, and certainly not exhibiting on 8K. So it looks amazing, and also I think the 65mm footage that's there in between the IMAX stuff, which is a huge proportion, the IMAX stuff, but the 65mm that's there, it is just as beautiful actually. And normally you can see a very, very clear difference, or at least you have done in the past, I think, with Nolan's work, and it just seems to be a higher quality film here because it is just as sharp. You get just as much detail.
Yeah.
I think it's really beautiful that stuff.
Yes.
The quality of the texture of the image.
You see, for me, the frame brought out other problems as well in this second viewing, because that kind of IMAX frame, which is closer to a 4:3 ratio, you would expect is very good for faces, for framing performances and performers, and of course I love the big screen and so on because you are in people's faces, or people's faces are on your mind and body, right? Like it normally forms like a kind of a link with the performer that I think is more intense, and it really brought out the inadequacies to me in what's his name, the protagonist,
John David Washington.
John David Washington. I thought it's one thing to be a blank like Keanu Reeves is in
The Matrix.
In The Matrix, but Keanu Reeves is so charismatic and beautiful, and he moves with such grace, and you can't stop looking at him, right? Whereas actually, I just thought, what's his name again?
John David Washington.
John David Washington. I mean, it's not that he was bad, but he lacked charisma. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a criticism I made in the first podcast.
Okay.
That, I think the film is trying to use him as a kind of Neo.
Right.
In that sense of a blank to learn about the world. And actually, he doesn't carry that off. I wish he had more of a reaction to things. In a sense, I liked him more to some degree here. I liked more the spark that he had with Robert Pattinson. I think they do have chemistry. It's quite light, but I think they do.
I mean, I think, obviously the scenes get livened up because Pattinson is so charismatic, and you can't stop looking at him, and he's doing more interesting things, with his line readings and so on. He's A, a better actor, and B, he's a star, neither of which Washington is.
I agree, and I do essentially agree that John David Washington's performance is a problem. But what I was reflecting on this time is how beautiful he is. I mean, maybe we can disagree on that, and maybe as a gay man you would disagree on that. I think he was very pleasurable to look at. He's trimmed his beard to within an inch of his life. He's very well taken care of. I think he has a beautiful kind of complexion, the kind of quality of his skin, and the film really picks up all of that about him. There's something very soft and beautiful about his skin, and I thought actually it's a real pleasure just to look at this guy. Yeah. I really like that.
I don't see that. And I was thinking, imagine what somebody like the now late Chadwick Boseman would have brought to this role. Yeah, where he just smiles and like screen lights up in Black Panther, right? I mean, there's nothing like that here.
Yeah.
So out of a young crop of black stars, who's the other one who's in Creed and Fruitvale Station?
Oh, Michael B. Jordan.
Yeah, he's wonderful, right? Imagine either of those two in this part. I think the film would have been different, really. So it made me appreciate Patterson more. And also, Debicki is just, I think she's wondrous to look at. The Kenneth Branagh, I think he's also charismaless and very unsexy, deeply unsexy and so on. But he's a very good actor. So actually he brings in that sense of menace and so on, through performance. Yeah, he's not relying on, charisma or screen presence or the camera loving him or all those things that we often use to talk about stars. He's not a film star, but he is a very accomplished actor, and he kind of brings that into play in the film, which I think makes Washington's weaknesses all the more apparent, because he's not really doing one and he's not doing the other.
Yeah. Shall we just quickly say we've done well to not talk about spoiler territory up until now, but I think we probably will be at some point.
Well, we did before, so why not again?
Well, there will be spoilers coming up, I think. At least some of the stuff I want to talk about is spoiler related. So were there things you enjoyed this time that you didn't the first time, for instance?
Yes, but they're really,
Well, give me a sense.
Silly Queenie things. So, for example, one of the things that I loved in an IMAX was that you could tell the texture of people's clothes, right? So those woolens and worsted and those wonderful, fabulous suits that Elizabeth Debicki wore, you could tell that the white shirts that Michael Caine and Kenneth Branagh wore were deep, rich, thick cotton, with the little dots on them. Yeah, so.
So the production values come out through the film.
That's right. So I paid, kind of attention to all of those things. In terms of the plot, in terms of the action, in terms of the whole idea of time, I had even more problems. And the thing is that for me, like, the second viewing only revealed weaknesses. So it's not as if I felt, I missed something the first viewing and now I have a deeper appreciation of it. It was almost like the opposite, right? I feel I come out of the second viewing with a worse opinion of the film than...
Can you give me an example of the kind of...
Yes, I mean, I was looking this time very actively for the action sequences, the going backward and forward, right? And it just felt silly, really. And it felt also kind of basic, like, so... a lot of that was just using reverse motion, right? And clearly there was a choreographing of the extras as well, but it felt banal because there's no payoff, right? So again, one of the things that I criticized last time was, the sense of danger of, buildings falling and then they go the reverse, right? I mean, you just don't feel any sense of excitement or suspense or worry that a building might fall on any of them, right? So that kind of brought out the lacks more clearly to me. The thing about the time, it made it even seem more stupid to me, right? Because so this time I was thinking, that the film was kind of unsophisticated. So I said before that comic books had been doing this 50 years ago, and you brought out a Red Dwarf thing.
Yeah, I was reminded in the week of an episode of Red Dwarf from 1989, which is Series 3, Episode 1, called Backwards. And it's a very well-known episode, and I've seen it before, where the characters literally visit, or they go through a parallel universe. They go through a time hole, I think. It's a comedy show. And they go to a parallel Earth where everything is backwards. So time runs backwards. Also, place names are backwards, so London is not null. There's a job listing in a newspaper, and they go, it's got very good demotion prospects, so it's everything is backwards in this world. And because I didn't know why you were bringing up comic books specifically, because it seems to me that time travel and time inversions and all those kind of playings with time have happened in pretty much every medium, not just comics, novels and films.
Well, I mean, I just mentioned comics because that's where I encountered it. I mean, I was a tween, who was mad about comics.
Yeah.
And, that's how I encountered it. And it was much more sophisticated in the comics, than what you see in Nolan. So, for example, one of the things was that people keep going back in time, right? And so theoretically, that's an endless loop, right? I.e., Kenneth Branagh could see previously or could revert back in time, right, before his death, right? So the film makes this thing about killing him at a particular time in order to avoid that, right? But the thing is that every time you step back in time, kind of your actions change time, it's like the butterfly effect, right? So what happens is, in comic books at least, is that you could go back in time multiple times, but actually those realities then exist as alternate realities, kind of equal possibilities, across different timelines and worlds, They don't end.
Well, it does depend on your particular fiction's version of time travel. There are many. There's not one idea of how time travel works. So in some things, there's an idea of going back in time, and whatever you end up doing has already happened. So you're fitting into whatever's already there. And this has a sense of that, for instance, in the bit where Elizabeth Debicki's character goes back to the boat and she kind of plays herself in that holiday in Vietnam. And then she jumps off the boat. You realise that's what she saw.
Yeah, she saw herself.
Which is basically the thing from Interstellar.
Yeah.
It was me all along, but done better. I mean, I think it works better here. And I think the reason it works better here is because it's not fundamental to the centre. Like, the thing about Interstellar is, all along it was me, and that's the most important thing, and it was dumb. Whereas here it's a side thing. That is kind of one idea of time travel. You go back, and even though you might think you're changing things, they have already happened, so you're just, whatever you're doing is somehow predetermined. And there are versions of time travel like Back to the Future where you go back and change things, and literally things change in the future, the butterfly effect thing.
Yes.
So it's not just a case of this is how comic books always did it. There will have been different versions.
But this is a film which is based on a continuous going back in time. Yeah, so characters don't just go back in time.
Yeah, they travel through time.
They travel through time, and they do so repeatedly. Yeah.
Well, they can flip whenever they like.
They can flip whenever they like, and they can change things whenever they like. But if they change things, then things have been changed.
Unless they have already been changed, and they're just they're doing what has already having been done.
No, because once you return back in time, then you can't use that excuse anymore. The timeline, the reality of that timeline alters.
What do you mean?
Well, so for example, let's say, I go back in time, yeah, and I see that I myself am crashing into this car, and I intercept it so that the car doesn't crash, right? Well, next time when I go back in time, yeah, if I go back post that moment, then that time has already been changed.
But does that happen here?
Doesn't it?
I don't know. Does something like that happen?
Yes,
here?
because Kenneth Branagh keeps going back in time. Yeah, he goes back for the Goya painting, right, and kind of removes it before she gets it. And yeah, my understanding is that he goes back repeatedly in time.
That did require some explanation for me, or at least that came that I noticed that because he removed the Goya painting from when they attack the Freeport, which is where it's being kept, and he says, "I've always had very good instincts about that," and it's not clear exactly what he means by that, whether he's had a message about that, because there is this whole thing about sending messages, and not just messages but items. So there's the thing about the gold that he receives on the boat; it flies up to his hand, so this is backwards travelling gold. And the idea is, I guess, that he has received this from the future and is sending it back to the past to be buried in that town where he comes from, so he can discover it and become richer. And again, there's it builds in this chicken and egg thing of what came first, and you're never going to get to the bottom of it. But then that I suppose does to some extent go into the forwards and backwards thing, because if the idea is, and this is completely not shown at all, so this is just speculative, but I'm thinking about it, right? If the idea is that this gold has come from the future and been buried so that as a young man he can dig it up and discover it, then if you think about the gold travelling backwards, right, for years and years it's been buried under the ground waiting for him, and then he picks it up and travelling forwards starts to do stuff with it, so then the gold has moved forward in time, or has it? So that is somewhere where his affect something that has already happened. It's
very unsatisfying. I mean, so the film tells you...
And I've explained it very badly, but
The film tells you about the grandfather paradox, right? That, if you go back and kill your own grandfather, could you really have gone back and killed your own grandfather because you haven't been born, right?
Yeah.
So there is a conundrum there that's kind of, unexplainable. It is a paradox, as the film says.
And the film answers it by going, we don't know, but they believe it, and that's all that counts. So
yes.
The film asks you to not really care.
Yeah, but then, you can't have the grandson kill the grandfather and keep going back to the past over and over again, right? Yeah, because, that's what Kenneth Branagh does. He goes back to the past recurringly.
I'm not sure where this recurringly is coming from.
Yes, he goes back... we see him in the past and speaking to the past at several instances and at several different times in the past, right? He talks to the protagonist, at the moment that the bomb is about to go off. He meets with him in that corridor. There's the car chase where they meet again. Those are several different instances.
Oh, but are they different travellings? Isn't that on the same journey, basically? And when he speaks to him on the phone, it's when he's gone back to that moment, that holiday, and then reverted back to travelling forwards. Yeah, from what I understand, from what I was getting out of the film, and I think the film really rewards a second viewing. I felt it was, once I was used to roughly what was going to happen, it was kind of filling in details. I was picking up on things that I missed. All the dialogue, for instance, that I felt like I'd missed the first time, stuff about the algorithm and stuff, I got more of here. And it's not at all because the dialogue itself is any clearer. I'm not sure that it is, but I was accustomed to what I was going to have to listen for, so I picked up on more. But when I got out the timeline this time, what seemed to have been clarified is it's basically 2 trips. They travel forwards up until the banana room, as I called it in the first podcast, the blue and red room. Then they travel backwards a week, back through the car chase, back through the attack on the Freeport with a jumbo jet, and back to, they're talking about the 14th, I guess, which was when this holiday in Vietnam was on the boat. And then they travel forwards again, which is when they engage in the fight. And so the fight in the Russian town and the stuff on the boat, that happened simultaneously, and that's on, I think, this date, the 14th they give. So it's only basically they go forwards, then backwards a while, then forwards again. I don't think there's more jumping than that.
But doesn't the Robert Pattinson character...
He jumps slightly differently. He takes things upon himself. But I think the bulk of the characters just go backwards in one long go once.
Yeah, but I believe that the Robert Pattinson character says that they're going to meet again several times in the past. Right? So the sense of a recurring traveling into the past is something that the film tells you is a fact.
Says to John David Washington.
Yeah.
At the end when he says,
Yeah.
I've got a past and stuff.
Yeah, because, so the end of one meeting is the beginning of another, but then, he says they will meet many different times.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. That's really external to what's going on in the film, though.
Well, it's part of the film. It's amongst the closing lines of one of the main characters, right? So it's what you're told.
Sure, but I'm not sure what you're getting out of that affects what we see in the bulk of the film.
Well, but for me, it made all of those elements even more confusing and unclear and kind of illogical, right? Because every time you go to the past, you're changing the future. Right, so you can't just keep going back and expecting things to be on the same continuum.
I mean, I let that go.
Okay. Well, you have to because.
But here's the thing. It's an interesting thing because I've been thinking about this for 4 days and I've been making all sorts of notes, and I talked to my brother as well on Friday night. He saw it the day after we did at the BFI, and he was really angry. Like you were a bit grumpy maybe. He was fucking angry. He was shouting. I couldn't get a word in. He was like, and it was. I think for him it was about disappointment. Like he wanted this to be so much more. He was very very angry with the way it was going and stuff. Anyway, the point is, I've been thinking about it a lot, and it occurs to me that one of the pleasures of Christopher Nolan's films is sitting down, working through the logic in your head, thinking about it. That's something I enjoy, and I have enjoyed it for the last 4 days. I enjoyed it a lot with Inception. I enjoyed it with The Prestige. Like, just working out the kind of puzzle box of the film is a pleasure, actually. I'm not sure it's a pleasure for everyone, but for me it is. And I don't think that's something to be sniffed at. I like that. I mean, we've just been having a conversation for 10 minutes about how the logic works, and you're just expressing dissatisfaction with it.
Yes.
But
I just think it's stupid.
But still,
and not well thought out.
But still, I've liked working through it, and I think that's... And so that line of dialogue, it's a kind of... The film sort of contradicts itself. That line of dialogue that Clémence Poggi has, the French girl who runs the lab at the start, where she shows him the backwards running gun and the backwards running bullets, and she says, don't try to understand it, just feel it. I wish the film, to some extent, would take its own advice. But on the other hand... The fact that it doesn't, and it so insists upon its logic and its rules and playing through all the possibilities of the world it's set up, is really a pleasure for me.
Well,
that's what I like.
I'm happy that it's a pleasure for you. My own feeling is I'm not wasting that amount of thinking time on something so stupid. You can't ask people to think and say thought doesn't matter. Ignore it, feel it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I think that line of dialogue is kind of... It's kind of a problem, because it preaches something that won't practice.
It's a catch-all excuse for the faults in the film.
Yeah, to some degree, if there are faults. But then I like thinking about them. I've enjoyed thinking about them for 4 days. How does the logic work? And when it comes out on DVD, I will go through... I'll look at the chase scenes, and I will go frame by frame on what's going backwards and what's not, and how's it interacting, because I do like that. And that's really not to be sniffed at. And when we were talking... Well,
I'm not sniffing at it, but it's almost like I wish you'd devote that attention to better films.
I know what you mean. But and here's another thing, right? the fundamental reason that I like the film more today is because I knew what to expect, and so I could appreciate the details and appreciate putting together some of the way it's working more in my head, because it wasn't just a surprise to me. Much of what's happening in the first time round, I was not making any sense of because it was just throwing things at me. What I like more here, for instance, is the blue and red room, the banana room. I hadn't really picked up the first time that the reason that on the blue side of the room, Kenneth Branagh's dialogue sounds garbled is because he's literally speaking backwards. It's being reversed. And then the reason it comes out of the speaker is because the speaker is reversing it so his question can be understood forwards. Because it kind of sounded like he was speaking Russian, you know, because I couldn't understand it. And then, of course, you go through the room and you hear his questions being shouted, and you hear John David Washington speaking what effectively is backwards. But I hadn't, because it was kind of happening quickly, I hadn't picked up that that's how that was working the first time. You're literally watching backwards action.
Yes.
Made it clearer this time. And also the thing of when people go into the turnstile, as I now know it's called, the backwards making machine, they go in and come out at exactly the same time because that is a hinge in time. I hadn't appreciated that the first time, you know. So again, made it clearer. I liked...
I grant you that,
Yeah.
and I get that, right? You see it again and you notice more. But actually, the noticing more didn't end up making it better for me or more complex or, it just, you do notice more, you know. Things that you missed out the first time, you do notice. You certainly notice all the rhymings in different parts of the film, you know, kind of much more clearly and so on. But it just didn't add up to a better film. So, you know,
no, I agree with that. No, that's a good point. It doesn't make it a better film. It made the experience better.
Yes.
I liked understanding more of it.
Yes, I mean, I like understanding more of it, but I just didn't feel it was rewarding. It didn't reward the attention. You know, it's not, you know, because normally in films that are better, you know, you watch it again and you come with a renewed appreciation or an increased appreciation or, you know, other ideas of what the film does come to you. It makes it a richer experience. You know, to me, this didn't make it a richer experience. I just, you know, you do notice more things. You're paying attention to different things because you know the plot, right? But it didn't translate into, you know, your own appreciation is richer, but actually it confirms your initial view of the film just in a richer way, right?
Yeah, I sort of see what you mean. And I do like it more, but it's true to say that what I like more is stuff that I already liked.
Yes.
I didn't like more anything that I didn't really care for the first time.
Yeah. What did you think of the sound this time around?
I was again paying attention to the soundtrack and not hearing anything that I really liked.
Yes,
or felt
same
memorable.
with me.
It's interesting. I saw a thing on Twitter that was the opening opera scene, and someone had put a piece of music from Inception over it, and it just improved it 1,000-fold.
Right.
You know, just the identifiable theme, the sense of the melody, just the feeling that was created in that music. And it's not to say that I just love Hans Zimmer's music kind of unconditionally, because I don't, and I think you can really feel in a lot of his music a kind of industrial feel. And when I say industrial, I mean like it's the sense that his work is like he has like a factory of composition. Whereas if you listen to something like Danny Elfman, maybe, you know, I think a lot of Danny Elfman's music sounds pretty much the same. He goes through a lot of similar themes a lot in his work. You can really tell a Danny Elfman piece, I think, kind of within a few seconds of hearing it. He has some very similar ideas going on. On the other hand, you really feel like you know that guy through his music. I don't think you do that with Hans Zimmer. I think you feel that there's a kind of, it's like music to a brief almost. But with that said, his music does contain musical ideas and motifs that you recognise and themes, and I think the music here lacks all of that. So I didn't like it anymore. In fact, I appreciated, I suppose, when it wasn't being used, because, you know, it's so overwhelming the first time, it's so loud throughout, and that's pretty much the only comment we made. I appreciated the moments when it dropped out here, which aren't many, particularly the moment where Sata is killed and thrown over the boat, and when he hits the handrail, the music cuts out, and it's like that bit from Titanic where the guy hits the propeller blades, and actually that's a moment. This was a reasonably full cinema today. I mean, there was still social distancing and stuff, but it was like a third to half full.
It was pretty packed, actually.
And at that moment, I heard people gasp. You know, it's like it's quite a sort of brutal kind of death that's shown kind of face on. Like,
it's the most muted reaction, though, to any Nolan film that I have seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, I mean, when I went to see Dunkirk, you know, in Imax, it's like people were practically weeping, right? You know, kind of, they were so emotionally involved. Interstellar was, you know, kind of the same, and actually I felt very alienated because people were really responding and I wasn't. And again with Inception, like, you could see that people were really dazzled by it. I didn't get any sense of the audience involvement in those ways in this film.
I agree with that. There is a big sense of having seen it before, I think, aesthetically, because it is so similar, particularly to Inception, I think, in its aesthetic and kind of sub-Bond as well.
Yes.
And it lacks the fun and the tone of those. And in fact, one of the things I was talking about with my brother, he was very pissed off that it lacked aesthetic imagination, I suppose.
It did.
And
I agree with your brother.
And actually, we were talking about imagination in the sense that, okay, here's another problem I have with it. It's the climactic scene in the war where they go into the sort of underground bunker, the military installments, and they're there, and that's where the physical algorithm is, and they're on opposite sides of the barrier and stuff. And I just thought, and this is something my brother brought up, is why does that have to be like that? Right? There is this adherence to the aesthetic that this is in a Russian abandoned facility, it's a nuclear bunker, that's where it's all being kept. You've been told this variously, vaguely. And so when you get into this underground bunker, it's very dark. The shots are very tight. You can hardly really see anything. You can hardly really get a sense of how many people are there and where they are. And I was just thinking, like, what's to prevent them from making a big, clean, white, bright sci-fi room and saying this is where the algorithm is kept? Just something like that.
Or making it much deeper. So imagine what Spielberg would have done with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been a tour de force scene, right?
Yeah.
Full of excitement and laughs and danger, and, you know, kind of, it would have gotten your heart pumping. I mean,
and that was
nothing.
Yeah. And that was a real problem the first time because it led to confusion, you know, and we're in what's supposed to be a climactic moment.
Yes.
And it made more sense this time. I had seen the film once, but still, it's not good enough. And actually, you go, well, just where is the imagination?
Yes.
Where is the
Spielberg also
flair?
would have brought emotion. So as well as the laughs and the thrills and the danger and all of that, you know, imagine what he would have made of the recognition of the
patch.
Yeah.
Or no, the tag on the bag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, he would have milked that. You know, he would have made you, you know, sniffle a bit. You know.
Yeah.
There's just none of that. It's almost like he's not interested in emotion.
The ending did still work on me, though. What I said was a touching ending with the recognition that he sacrificed himself for him and the thing they're going to have a friendship. My brother was suggesting, I think it was my brother, it might have been you in the first podcast, I actually don't remember, suggesting when he mentions we know each other for a long time and we're going to have some adventures, why can't you see 3 or 4 snippets, flashbacks or flash forwards, I suppose, of what those adventures will be? And I was thinking, because I was really paying attention at this time, and I thought, you know, there is room for that. But the film does still work. That ending does still work without that.
I almost snorted. You know, I forget which line it was that Robert Pattinson says, but I almost snorted. I had to restrain myself because I knew it would piss you off.
Was it I think for me, this is the end of a beautiful friendship.
I forget, it might have been that, but I just thought, oh, like, so cheesy. You know,
well, clearly, I mean, the thing is, clearly Robert Pattinson's character has seen Casablanca, so he's making a joke.
Yeah.
He kind of means it, but it's ironic.
Yeah, I kind of... Anyway, the person who came off better was... what's his name? The one whom I didn't recognize.
Aaron Taylor-Johnson.
Aaron Taylor-Johnson. So, you know, now that I know who he is, and I was just paying more attention, and actually, to be fair to him, yeah, because again, he doesn't come across as like
a star,
but he's doing interesting things with his line readings and his inflections and, you know, kind of gestures. You know, because it's a nothing of a part, right? So he is kind of bringing some life into it, right? I think, through his performance in a way that I appreciated more this time around.
What I like about him, and I think I liked the first time,
You did, yeah.
is because he's a like a squadron leader. He's a military guy, and what he's having to deal with is these two spy guys who are into the time travel shit. And it's like, clearly he's used to the time travel shit, right? He has experience with it, because the way he talks, it's not new to him. And so he talks about, you know, what happens when we go through the thing and blah, blah, blah. And then he's in charge of giving the briefing before the big backwards-forwards war scene. So this guy's, like, used to it. And it's as though he's, like, sick and tired already of having to deal with these two chumps who think it's all about them. And, like, you know what I mean? There's a sense of, like, oh God, these fucking idiots, they don't know what they're doing, just listen to me.
Yeah.
I kind of like about him.
Well, I appreciated his performance this time around, you know. I was paying attention to it. And so, yeah, that made me appreciate his contributions more than I did the first time around.
I want to say something else that, again, was an improvement from my experience this time, which was that I realised how to approach the film from the start. And that is to say, the first time round, I didn't approach it as a spy film, which it clearly is. I didn't think of it as a spy film. I hadn't been clued in by the promotional material to think of it as a spy film. I thought of it as a kind of high-concept action film, which is why I think the first time I watched it, and the first third of the film, is spycraft. I was kind of thinking, just, you know, bring me the time stuff. Where's the time stuff? And I was kind of not that involved in the spy stuff. And this time round, knowing that this is what the first third of the film is going to be, I enjoyed it more. I followed the story better. I understood better, you know, who the Priya character was, for instance, that kind of thing. Liked all of that more. And what I also liked more is the feeling of the film transforming when it gets into the banana room. You know, after they come out of there, the film, I think, really kind of transforms into much more of an action chase thing. Whereas up until then, it's been a spy. You know.
I mean, to me, it's a failure. You know, because if you're looking at it as a spy thing, I mean, the thing that keeps coming to mind is The Night Manager for me, right?
Yeah.
You know, which is it was great television, and it was glamorous and exciting and tense. You know, and all the spy thing and the thing about being discovered and the thing of figuring out, you know, the plot as it goes along in relation to that which was hidden and then revealed. I mean, you know, that was like really fantastic, I thought, in The Night Manager. Whereas, you know, it didn't excite me in those ways here, you know. So I think, you know, if you're seeing it as a spy film and you're comparing it to really good spy films, it fails that way as well.
I appreciate that. And you're not the only person to make the comparison with The Night Manager.
Yes, I've noticed this.
Yeah, it's something that's come up, and that particular comparison hadn't hit me, but it's absolutely obvious when you point it out, and it is right. Although something that I think this does have in common with a lot of spy films, actually, including the more conventional, like James Bond, as opposed to the kind of non-franchise things, is I think they all benefit from second viewings, those films. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I very often come out having lost track of various plot things in those films. And again, it's a second viewing that I go, oh, here's where this is, oh, that's where that was, oh, here's the information that I could have got, blah, blah, blah. Everything makes more sense the second time
I think
in a regular spy film, as this does.
I think that's true of almost every type of film now, because I think ever since the advent of DVDs, for sure, you know, kind of filmmakers know that you're forwarding and, you know, rewinding, and, you know, you watch the film over. I mean, you know, kind of people would buy the films in the expectation, as opposed to renting, the expectation that it is something that they would watch many times or several times, right? So I think kind of films now, or certainly the ambitious ones, are designed with multiple viewings in mind.
Maybe, but I'm talking about a specific thing in the spy genre, because spy films are so deeply about information and what's hidden and what people know, and the revelations that will come to recontextualize things we already knew, make sense of, you know. So I think there is something quite specific to the way that information works in spy films in particular
there is.
that this shares. And so the fact that I was confused by a lot of the spy stuff and the relationships between the characters, and as I say, particularly the Priya characters' importance to the whole thing, I don't think that's such a huge problem with the film as I may have thought the first time.
Yes, well, I think
because
it
it's something that I would expect any spy film to make more sense of the second time, which it does.
But no, you would also expect spy films to make sense of it the first time around, because you can't generate suspense in a viewer, unless they understand what's at stake.
Well, maybe that's just me. Like I say, it may just be me that I always find much more clarity the second time, to the extent that actually I probably was confused the first time in pretty much any spy film.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not criticizing that you find more clarity the second time, but, in any spy film, you also have a certain degree of clarity the first time around. Otherwise, kind of things like suspense just don't happen, right? Because, there has to be a differential of knowledge between what you know about the character and what the character knows about the situation that they're in, so that you feel the danger that they're in that they don't yet realize, or something like that, right? So those things have to be clear. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I'm saying is maybe I'm just a shit viewer of spy films, because I think I pretty much always confused the first time.
All right, okay.
Something that was recontextualised here, actually not recontextualised, just, again, made clearer, that I liked, is the final boat scenes, the holiday in Vietnam. Because, I suppose I'd realised the first time round that these are, I must have obviously known that these are the future characters having returned to the past and are playing out the boat scene, but I appreciated more this time how both of these people, Sator and Kat, are playing earlier versions of themselves, but for different reasons, and they both think that the other person... So Sator is there ready to die, and he's there because he liked his holiday and that's where he wishes to die, and he thinks that Kat is the version of Kat who he's just told, give up your son, blah blah blah. And Kat is the future Kat who's gone back and knows that Sator is the future Sator, but is playing the past Kat who doesn't know that Sator is the future Sator. So actually it's kind of understanding better exactly what the characters were there.
It also makes you appreciate Elizabeth Debicki's performance more.
Yeah, I think so.
Because you are aware of that, that she is playing somebody feeling what she once felt but isn't feeling now, right?
Yeah.
And you see the difference because that scene is almost shown to us at different times, and so kind of in the finale you really see all of those nuances in the performance. So I thought my appreciation of her increased, because I think she's magnificent looking, and I think she's a real star if someone gives her the parts. But also I think she's a very good actress. I mean, she just convey all of that.
Yeah.
So
I agree. And like I said, I think just understanding better how that scene was operating and what those characters were doing was more enjoyable, more fun to me. The idea that they are both playing themselves, but in kind of different ways, for different reasons, with different levels of knowledge. I like. I had more clarity the second time and I liked it more. I've got a note here about I've made a backwards film and it was harder than Tenet. I made a backwards running film 10 years ago when I was at university, which was a 7-minute long thing in a single take, and it was all set to... What's the piece from the Nutcracker? The Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, is it?
Yes.
It was set to that, and we had to and there was loads of action in it that was specifically timed to the music. So I had to write this all down. Well, I had to listen to the music and write down all the important bits, and then write down what was going to happen in the film, and then play it all backwards, and then try and film it in time. Fucking difficult. So actually, any individual thing in here is not as hard as that was. So I deserve some credit. That's one thing.
You can put it in the post.
Yeah, I might put it in there. I noticed the Sator Square this time. I hadn't really picked up on it the first time. But the Sator Square, the old Latin Sator Arepo Tenet Opera Rotas.
Okay.
Is a sentence that's a palindrome, and it can also be written as a square, so you can read it top to bottom or left to right.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
And that shows up here. So Sator is the bad guy's name. Rotas is his company. Opera is the opera scene at the start. Arepo is the name of the guy who forges the paintings. And actually, I really picked up on the first one. I thought, Arepo, where have I heard that before? And it was only thinking about it, I picked it up. And obviously, Tenet is the code word. It's the central organisation or whatever. I think you still don't really get a real sense of what Tenet means, but it is there. And ultimately, all of that's kind of not important because it's just window dressing. It's just names of stuff.
Yeah.
And Nolan likes names of stuff.
It's a game for Nolan that actually doesn't add anything to, the expression of meaning or feeling in the film.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's just window dressing and whatever. Here's something else that I think you might be interested in thinking about is the film let Elizabeth Debicki be tall, and it almost fetishizes her height. The camera's always looking up at her. John David Washington, by comparison, is quite short. I don't know how short he might be in real life. Maybe not that short, but she's very tall, and she's always got heels on as well.
Yeah.
And actually, in the one scene, she, her long legs are important because she unlocks a car with them, and the camera, her skirt sort of rides up, and the camera goes along her legs, and it really likes to look at her legs. But it's not just a sexual thing. Like she has this tall.
I like the use
dominance
of her height.
Yeah.
And it spoke well of the filmmakers that they didn't try to diminish her. Yeah, because you could easily have tricked that, right?
Do you remember Queen and Slim?
Yes.
Reminded me of that, right? Like there's a real energy and just kind of enjoyment in seeing a shorter guy and a taller woman play together, and the film makes nothing, no comment about it or anything like that. Well, it just lets it be.
There's a little bit of a historical comment. I mean, in the sense that, one of the visual cliches of post-Brezhnev Russia, right, or not only Russia, but Eastern Europe, was to see these incredibly tall, glamorous models, with like kind of these short, fat billionaires, right? So I think there's a little bit of playing into that.
That's true. Yeah. Well, that's certainly the image that that Kenneth Branagh has with her. And there's one particular shot, I think, which is where it's on his yacht, and it's around the time that he's picking up all the gold, and he kind of storms off somewhere, and you see him, and he's pretty squat looking, and certainly compared to her, he is, and I think the film enjoys that.
Yeah. It does.
The film enjoys the kind of short, angry, billionaire evil guy. I wanted to say that the war scene feels small.
Yes, it does.
And this was something that came into focus for me when I was watching the Tim Burton Batman films recently. Because there are lots and lots of things that I like in those films, especially Batman Returns, which I've loved since I was a kid. But something that I really picked up on in those films is how you can feel the limits of the world, the physical limits, because everything's been shot on these sound stages. And so when, there's a lot of scenes in those films which are on like the steps of the town hall and a crowd of reporters or civilians or whatever. And you can really feel the small size of the crowd and how they can't film anything too wide because the set will end, which I felt like kind of a problem in those films. But maybe it's also part of their charm. But here, the war scene, you're sent to this small, isolated Russian town. That's the idea, or it's like a nuclear bunker. So it's a kind of small place. But there are these wide shots, and they're even more so in IMAX, where you see the entire place, the entire location, and empty space around it. You feel how actually small this is, and you feel a lack of people in there even. Imagine how huge it would feel. Like, remember how big it felt in The Dark Knight Rises, where it's like kind of all-out war on the streets of Gotham by the end, and it's just fistfights left, right, and centre, and a huge brawl. It felt kind of big, right?
It's very interesting because I was watching I 100 Cavalieri, or 100 Horsemen, as part of the Ritrovato thing. And it's a B movie. It's by Vittorio Cotafavi, who, is often ranked with Mario Bava as, one of the king of the B films in Italy. And that had like hundreds of extras, like thousands of extras, right? In widescreen, and these battles between the Muslims and the Christians, and and actually this film feels thin, in comparison. It doesn't have, that sense of sweep and scope, and it certainly doesn't have the fluidity in the action that, this Italian B movie had.
And actually, I felt in that scene, I mentioned on the first podcast, watching the background extras and how they were just walking kind of carefully to try and look like they were in reverse, but they clearly were just walking. And actually made me think, this adherence to getting everything in camera that Nolan has, in this instance, is a problem, because if they had used CGI to computer generate some soldiers who were actually moving backwards, because you could do it in the computer at the right speed, doing the right actions, it would have looked 1,000 times better, more convincing, more active, more alive.
Or just be smarter about the production, because the reason why Kotafavi was able to use thousands of extras is because he went to Spain to film it in the early 1960s, where you could buy like 1,000 extras for 10 pence, right? Like those things matter as well. Like just go to a place where you can afford all the extras, and kind of
Well, money is clearly not a problem here, though, is it? I mean,
well, but maybe ease of. I mean, there's a sense about this film, which I don't like, which is that locations were chosen, in relation to vacation spots for the director. I can imagine them spending a year in advance, choosing the locations, in Portofino or Vietnam, all those gorgeous, expensive places. The catamaran race, I mean, what was the point of that? You could have filmed a more exciting, but it kind of...
I didn't even know who was on the other catamaran.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a sense in which all of those things were not really in the service of the film, that there's an ulterior motive to them. I'm not sure what it is, but...
My brother was annoyed. He said, just because you've done Dunkirk, now you're like, I can film boats. He got really annoyed with that. I think he said something similar about the choice of locations as well, like just because you want to go there. But yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to specifically that thing about the action scene, money for extras clearly is not an issue, because this is like a $250 million film. I think it's an aesthetic choice, as they always are, and I think in this case it was the wrong choice, because that scene would have been livened up through real backwards looking people, through CGI. Because it can be made to look very realistic. And Christopher Nolan has used CGI. He does use CGI, but he likes to talk about how much he limits it, how little he does if he can. I think it's possible to actually do that too much. But, like I say, money's not the issue. That bit where they blow the plane up and gold bars just dump on the floor feels almost like a self-referential joke as to how much money Christopher Nolan's able to spend in his pursuit of, greatness.
So, final word?
I enjoyed it more the second time. I don't think any of the additional pleasures had anything to do with the Imax, really. Other than, I suppose, that clarity, like I say. I mean, I really did like looking at John David Washington.
Well, yeah.
But in terms of, when it comes to cinematography, kind of artistic effect or emotional effect, I don't think it added anything to my experience, although I'm glad that I saw it so I could find out.
I'm glad that I saw it, because I think... this thing about the composition, seeing it on IMAX developed my thinking on it.
Yeah.
As far as my experience of watching it, I must say I was only mildly bored. There was the section in the middle of the film, which I found it slightly dull in the first viewing. I found dull again. But I enjoyed watching it. But it is one of those films where, like, your second viewing just confirms your poor opinion that you had in your first viewing. That you understand more, but it doesn't make the film better.
Yeah. Like I say, everything that I liked here, I liked the first time. I liked more here, probably. Understood it better. I like understanding things better. I will continue to turn over the film's logic in my head. I will continue to look forward to it to come out on home media, because I'll be able to look at it closely and I will enjoy that. That is a pleasure that I don't think should be underestimated, but it's not the greatest pleasure a film can give you.
I, on the other hand, will be happy never to see it again. So, thank you very much for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Please like, share, and subscribe.
Yes.
It helps. Give us a nice, good rating if you like it on iTunes and stuff. It really helps. Thank you.
Excellent.